business and future growth. And when we talk about those terms to those who are the leaders, to our leaders in the current social context, it is the same issue that the whole NAACP vote the other week was about. When you begin to talk about bringing our people to a reality that we're still going to be the left behind until we open up to the reality of what the real issues that are being faced by people are, it's not going to work. We got to stop these television promo, the same thing you talk about, Michael Eric, I didn't hear it, but we got to stop that and get down to the same kind of substance that's essential for other people to survive. And with the population shift, there's an economic shift. Whites will rise back to the top. Asians, who are 4% of the population, will be number 2. Latinos, number 3. We will still be number 4. We still are 40, 30 points behind whites in home ownership, and that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, there are our realities. We don't talk about our realities because we take 2 or 3 people, we say they're the leaders, we listen to them. I think what was said earlier in terms of the shift is taking place. T.D. Jakes, myself, Meeks from Chicago, did the Black Caucus session this year in terms of where the black church and where black people are going. When that was over, they invited Jesse to speak. Jesse told us we have no rights. I was an elected congressman. I served 11 years. Meeks is the Senate leader in the Illinois State Senate. We are not supposed to talk to the president without talking to him first. Our reality is we got to have a shift. And the shift is taking place. And I think Eugene said it right, that there's a provisional model of leadership that is taking place where people recognize power. My church, there's nothing in New York that's happening without my church being engaged in it. And that's where we've got to get to where it is about power, politics that responds to the power of people that are represented by people who understand how to infuse them into that power, as opposed to one person or 2 people being the voice of power, when in fact, that is not representative of the whole.
I'd like to continue on with that. During the Million Man March, what Minister Waleed spoke about, I was part of the National Youth Organizing Committee, and we came to the table to express our issues from young people's perspective. We talked about the transitioning of the leadership. And one Reverend Jackson said, and this is what he told us, right? He told me individually, you're going to have to take the baton from my hand, which means that I'm going to keep this. This is mine. There's no transitioning of the baton, brother. You're not, and part of it is the reality is this, that during the Civil Rights era, I had to try to figure out why did he say that? I'm trying to, figure this out. But he was 20 in the Civil Rights era. And so in the South, and still to this day, they still see themselves as the emerging leadership per se. And I think that's a problem when no disrespect to him, but from the SCLC, the brother who retired from there, Laurie, when you're 80 years old and start a new organization, there's a problem when there's nobody there to pass on the baton to. So we continue to find ourselves in these same trenches. But and when I did the Million Family March, I was editor for the legislative plan for the Million Family March. And so when I said with Minister Farrakhan, he said my quiet leader. So there was a conversation between the 2 of us that was different from the established leadership of today who grabs the headlines. You know, if you put a camera in a certain room, who's going to show up and speak. You know it already. And so it has to be a point where we decide that we'll determine the issues, not just from the Democratic or the Republican side, but just from the issues that are most relevant to our people.
One more question.
Okay, maybe 2 more?
2 more?
Okay, we'll do 2 more.
Hi, I have a controversial question that I would like to get an honest answer on. Do you think that if you had a white candidate who shared your values, interests, and had an articulated vision for the interests of your community versus a black candidate who had a less articulated vision, where do you think the votes of your communities would lean towards?
I think in New York it was proven in Mike Bloomberg's election, these shift parties ran as a Republican, got elected with significant numbers of African American votes because they felt he was speaking to their issues. And it did not matter that Freddie Ferrer was running on the other side. The reality is that if the best candidate out there articulates those issues, and those issues speaks to people, and he has delivered on them, which got him a second term with even more African American support. I think they will vote their interest if their interest is articulated by the candidate properly.
I would just like to concur with what he said and also add on, I think as a whole, I believe that our society is becoming more politically mature in regards to this, not just voting on personalities, but voting based upon principles. For an example, not only seeing the rise of Barack Obama, but I'd like to also make reference to a good friend of mine and a role model, Mr. Keith Ellison, who was voted in Minnesota, the first African American voted to Congress in the state of Minnesota, and the first Muslim voted into Congress. And he was voted in a predominantly non-African American district. He got a lot of support from Jewish community, he got a lot of support from labor, irrespective of racial racial background, because of his character and the principles he set forth. So I would say not only in the African American community, but I believe America as a whole, I believe that we're evolving, we're becoming more politically mature as a nation.
You know, that's an interesting question, but I like to pose it in a different way, thinking about my friend Harold Ford. When will America vote for a black candidate who's more articulate, more prepared, more ready to run for office? Why is the question when we're going to vote? We've been voting for white folk for 400, when we could vote, excuse me. We've been voting for white folk for 40 years. And so when is that going to happen in America where white people determine that they will vote for us when we're better candidates for that? Perfect example is Harold Ford. He should have won that race in Tennessee. But because of the racism in America, it's the reason why he lost. And so there is a paradigm shift now with, I say, with Barack Obama and the others. So I take issue with the question, really. And I'm going to pass the mic before I get mine.
And I think just as in Harold's case, it just is this point, the same issues that brought Harold to election day, leading it out the polls, and then losing the election, are the same issues that Obama's going to have to face. No matter how high they lift him between now and next year, by the time that election comes, there are many whites who will say, yes, I can vote for him. But they're going to have to, if they get to the point of having to make a choice between a woman, a white woman, and a black man, the reality is the history of America has been for neither one of them. But if it comes down to the choice, then I tend to think that it will go the other way. Now, what our biggest problem is going to be white male Democrats.
Yes.
Because they don't want the woman or the black man.
They're waiting for boredom. They'll be happy to.
Well, they'll take that also.
As you mentioned, you talked about, you touched on a little bit, the lack of visible black clergy in Barack Obama with Harold Ford Jr. And I know even going back to Douglas Wilder's campaign for lieutenant governor and his campaign for governor, what conversations have been had among African American clergy about the appropriate role for the African American clergy when it comes to black candidates?
I think that black politicians in certain contexts have ambiguous and ambivalent relationships to black clergy as power equals. You see, so that, for example, it's very interesting, the presiding bishop of, the former presiding bishop of the Church of God in Christ passed, and there was a funeral. It's very interesting. So the presiding bishop, G. Patterson, passes on a Tuesday. 3 hours after he passed, the Clinton administration is making overtures to come to this state funeral within the black community. We never heard from Mr. Obama that day. And when they eventually did get to us, it was to send the missus on the Friday prior to the actual funeral. There's a very interesting relationship that no one's talked honestly